It's preparing it.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to our East Bay Comps and Coffee. We've got some great information to share today. With all of the crazy in the real estate market and questions coming from everyone about where's the market likely heading, what are we going to see moving forward? Is this similar to 2006 for any of you that were, engaged in real estate back then? So welcome. Thank you for joining with us. So we're going to introduce ourselves real quick, and then we'll get right into the meat of our information. And we actually have a special guest that's going to jump on with us at some point here shortly. The CEO and founder of our company, Chris Trapani, is going to join us with a little bit of like a perspective on his opinion about where real estate's going to go. So that'll be a very interesting share. But in the meantime, we'll just get right to work. So I'm Lisa Doyle.
I'm Kim Winters.
Oh, I'm TJ Smith.
I'm Ryan Day.
Yeah, thank you. So you guys, we work together as a group, so we always are engaging in all of this, brainstorming. So we wanted to share with you guys. So let's get right into our biggest question of today. So we've had clients, and all of us are working with buyers right now, and families that are looking for homes, families that are selling homes. Is, where are we likely to go in over these next few years? And so this is one thing that we wanted to share from one of the most knowledgeable economists. And I remember watching what he had shared back when we had cycles in the past. And so he was always on top of what was going on. And of course, this is something that all of us, this doesn't come at any surprise. It's not just a seller's market. It's a crazy super seller's market. This is the most incredibly competitive home buying environment that we've ever had in my 34 years. So obviously we've been noticing this, but this is across the whole country in most cities. Yep. So we'll go to our next slide. So this is a big one. Is this like the last time? I know you guys have all had the questions from clients asking this question, right? We've all been in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In dialogue.
Yeah, they're like almost expecting it to like the market to fall or crash like 2006 or 7.
Yep. During the financial crisis. So the data that we're going to share, this is actually national statistics. And then we're going to go over some local statistics to share with you guys too. But nationally, this data comes from some very qualified longtime economists that have been studying what's been going on in the market over this last couple of years. So this is very credible information that'll give you guys a little bit of reassurance about what you might expect in the next years. So this is an important one, where people always ask us, why is the market so hot right now? And back in 2019, we're going to give you guys a little perspective on that as well. What happened then and why is it so heated now? So if you actually go back to the beginning of middle of 19, rates actually jumped up to like 5%. I know we all experienced it that, rates were just like 4.9, 5.1. So obviously the cost of money was so much more expensive then. And we had a slower environment back in 19. So the very beginning of 2020, last year, even pre-COVID, rates started falling and the market started getting heated, but long before COVID hit us all last March. But if you look at the statistics, rates dropped to historic lows. I don't know about you guys. What was the lowest you guys had a buyer finance? What was your lowest? I know TJ, you had a client that got rid in really low.
Yeah, I had a couple clients, very few that had 2.5%.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I think 2.7 was some of my buyers got in. 2.5 is amazing.
So amazing. I had 2 families that were able to buy, and one refinanced at that 2.5. So then, of course, we've had a little bit of an uptick in rates over this last few months, but still 3.1, 3.2, still historic lows, still.
Yeah.
But the one thing for families to keep in mind, buyers to keep in mind, is we'll probably, as COVID is more behind us, as we progress through this year, hopefully as a country, we see COVID behind us even more and more. We're likely to see rates start to get back to maybe what would be kind of historic normal, which even 5% is lower than the averages for the last 60 or 70 years. So, we might see some rate rising as the economy kind of gets back into a little bit more of a confident role after COVID.
And Lisa, when those rates, eventually, because they're going to rise eventually at some point, historically have prices stabilized with those rates, or have they continued to appreciate like we're seeing now?
Pretty definitely. I think, everything causes the markets to stabilize, or those two main things: interest rates, given that the money costs more, and affordability changes for sure. Rising rates will definitely stabilize the market. I don't think it will be quite as heated once we see rates rise. So, it's a benefit for a buyer and a seller today, because, to get in at a lower rate, if you're paying 5% interest, on a house in our price range, that's thousands of dollars a month, generally, just in that difference in rate. So it's huge.
Well, also too, don't you think that as we get sort of past COVID and people go back to work, that may also slow things up a bit in terms of people moving out this way. I mean, even though more people can work from home, that getting back to some sort of normalcy may stabilize it a bit as well.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a bunch of factors, which we're going to be talking about that when Chris joins us. Many factors that could, that could cause our market to be more stable versus as heated as it is today, for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
And the Wall Street Journal commented on, the heated market that we're seeing right now. And they quoted saying the residential real estate market is on its biggest tear since 2006, just before the housing bubble burst and set up a global recession. Yet in nearly every meaningful way, today's market is the inverse of the previous boom. In the mid-2000s, loose mortgage lending standards enabled borrowers with poor credit histories to purchase homes beyond their means, sometimes with mortgages that required low payments in the early years of the loan. And when they're talking about the early payments or the low payments in the early years of the loan, what was that like when people were, jumping into those loan programs and then 2 or 3 years later realize that their payments increasing?
Yeah. And I remember this vividly. I know Kim and I are both, old enough and long enough in the business to experience this personally. It was crazy. I remember lenders, there were loan options, what we back in the day, we called those negative amortization loans. And what this really meant was a borrower or a home buyer that could only qualify for, let's say, an $800,000 loan. I even remember having a client, we were chatting about this before our presentation today. I had a client back in the day who said to me, hey, we want to buy this house. And I was like, that's awesome. And I'm so happy to help you. And he said, well, the challenge is they're asking $1.05 million for this house. This was back in 2006, so prices were less than today. They're asking $1.05 million. The problem is we can only qualify for 800. So we still want to buy it. And I said to him at the time, gosh, why don't you let me go find you an 800 home? But instead, they went off and did what we're talking about, which is a lot of the reason why the market did what it did back then and all the crisis, is they got what's called a negative amortization loan. And Kim, if you remember, what that means is the borrower buys in and they get a 1% interest rate, which sounds awesome, right? 1%. The challenge is it had built in the next 3 to 5 years, it goes from 1% to 6%. So this person who then can buy this house at 1%. And the challenge back then is I remember borrowers saying to us, oh, hey, it's okay. I can buy this house because if I can't afford it any longer, if the rates, I'll just sell it. It's okay. Well, what happened then? Financial crisis, prices dropped. People didn't have equity. So no longer could they just sell this home that now that they no longer can afford, right? So we don't do that anymore. Those loose lending practices are no longer in existence. People have to qualify. So it's just a different environment, 100% different. So fortunately.
Much safer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think TJ, I know we were chatting about this one earlier.
Yeah, so this one is super interesting because if you look at the trend right before the market had its big dip back in 07, 08, you'll see that the inventory, the rise is kind of crazy. It went, all the way up, almost triple from where it was just 3 years before.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing right now, if you look dating back just 4 years, it's the exact opposite effect. So if you were to kind of continue the trend that we're on right now, it'd be probably something to think about. Why would it crash if, the inventory is going down? We're seeing less and less inventory. So it's like an opposite effect. So it's super interesting to look at right now. Even though it's so active, we're seeing less and less.
Yeah, it's it's partly why the big pressure on our pricing, because our inventory and demand, like this, just supply and demand has been so opposite. But I remember I remember when the market shifted back in 06, 07, and all of a sudden, we went from being very active to that financial crisis and all the issues that we had with lending and all that. But you're right, inventory was much more significant back then. Today, there's just so little available, and we don't really see that dramatically changing. So we're likely to see that consistent market continuing.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is a good one. I love this one. And so it's like, if you look at the left on this graph, it talks about tappable equity. So as a country, and this is really good to know, as a country, we have been, during this boom, so much more as a country responsible with our equity in our homes. Like, for instance, back in the day, I remember back in 06, if you look at this graph, it says here, tappable equity back then was, the 4.6 trillion versus the 7.3 trillion that we have in home equities today. And the one thing that I love about this one is 89, for all of the people that did a refinance between this last 2 years versus back in 06, 07, 89% of all the people who did a refinance back then pulled out their equity.
Mhm.
They were taking what they had in their homes and basically spending it, using their homes as ATMs, basically, which was, it really hurt once the market started falling. This time, only 33% of all the families that did refinances, which there's been a lot of them because interest rates have been so low, only 33% have taken money out. Everybody else has remained like stable with their equity, which is awesome. And then if you look at the next graph there, total cash out in billions, we have, as again, our next graph, we'll share more of that too. I know TJ's going to share more of that too. So much more equity in our homes, like almost actually more than double of the homes across the country have more than double the equity. So that's a wonderful statistic that we hope continues. Hope families continue that way. Yeah, and this one, I think TJ was going to share.
Yeah. The next one, Ryan, that kind of outlines it a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's crazy to think about. I didn't actually realize that this many homes were owned free and clear in our country, but 38 right now % of homes are owned free and clear, which that's like a huge number.
Yeah. It puts in perspective, when you look at potential issues with, like, people say, is this going to be another bubble? So when you look back then, back in 08, 09, only 12% of families owned their homes free and clear versus now 38%.
Yeah, almost 40%.
Yeah, that's almost, I mean, we're approaching a half of the country owning their homes free and clear, which is such a wonderful testament to our, the country being much more responsible than back in the day. People aren't just taking money out and wasting it. Yeah.
I think people learned a lot through that because clearly they've changed how they live because of that, I think.
Yeah. 100%. It's just, it's just so much more healthy. Like when people say, this boom has been, I mean, I've been in the business 34 years. I know Kim's been around forever. Ryan and TJ a little younger than what we are, a lot younger. This is the most heated up market that I've ever seen in my 34 years. If you track it back, it's just an interesting time for sure.
And yet so healthy still, with the percentage of homes that have a great deal of equity and that are owned free and clear. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So kudos.
And it seems like we're seeing not only, a lot of 40% homeowners now have their house free and clear, but also the buyers that are buying the homes. I know I'm seeing it on my end. I know Kim and TJ and Lisa, you're probably seeing as well. The buyers now are buying with 50% down or more. So the likelihood of those homes being, underwater in the future and them being unstable for equity purposes is, slim to none right now because they're already starting off in such great financial positions.
Yeah, exactly. I know all of us have had buyers ask us, hey, I want to wait till the market crashes and then I want to buy a home, which we understand. Markets always have cycles, but for all the reasons why we're sharing, most home sellers, if they decide that they need to sell their homes for whatever reason, that they're in an equity position where they can sell. If anything changes in their dynamics of their family, job related dynamics or whatever, they can turn and sell, and they have equity in their homes. So it doesn't put them in that, that defaulting or distressed market that we had back in the day, so much more, less volatility. So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really fun. So we're going to share with you guys some data, some specific data to the East Bay. So all those slides were more of a national statistic, which our area has been very consistent with as well. But this is local. So this is crazy. We didn't go back to 2020 because of COVID. And obviously, for obvious reasons, the COVID numbers weren't as obvious as what this is going to display. So we decided to go into some of our main markets. We want to share with you some data on a few of our cities. And then we want to show you some examples of some houses. So I'm going to share with you some information on the Blackhawk area, which in our Danville area, it's part of our Danville market, but it's a separate little entity, which has seen a significant difference in the amount of activity. So I wanted to go back. So if you go back to 2019 in Blackhawk, And then I'll share with you these photographs, what this means. But I want to give you some data first. So in Blackhawk, back in 2019, there were 48 houses active, and there were only 6 that were pending. So 19 was a softer market all over because of rates, and the higher market was super low. So in Blackhawk right now, I mean, inventory is still low, but there are only 10 active listings and there's 14 pending. So this is the first time in years and years that we've had more pending than active in the Blackhawk, which is kind of an upper area. And then the second statistic I wanted to share, as far as Blackhawk is concerned, is back then there were only 27 homes sold in Blackhawk in 2019 through May. And right now we've already had 51. And then one other statistic I wanted to share about our East Bay in general is we always look at the active pending ratios, and our East Bay, each of us is going to share a little bit about a specific city. But I want to give you guys an overview first, and then we'll each share. So if you look at the East Bay in general, which is pretty big, it's like all the way from Livermore down the 580, all the way through the 680, the 24 clip with the La Miranda, all the way to Clayton. So it's a pretty broad, Martinez, Pleasant Hill, everything in between. As far as the data from 2019, in 2019, we had 2,255 houses sell up to May. Already this year, we've had over 3,100. So just a tremendous amount of increased numbers of home sales. And then the one statistic that this is the most, the biggest gap in the supply and demand that we've had. If you guys look at the last few months in our East Bay, there were less than 1,000 houses pending, and there were about 700 active. Right now we have active only 510, and there's over 1,000 pending. So now there's double, like the gap between the supply and demand is getting broader. So, continuing to be a very heated market overall. And then I'm going to share one other thing with you, and then you guys will share some cities. So here's 2 pictures. If you look at this 2019 versus 21, this is a neighborhood that we do a great deal of work in. It's called Shadow Creek here in Danville. And if you look at these 2 houses, they're both very similar. Westbrook Court had some upgrades, although in a very quiet location, not dramatically upgraded, just a nice clean house. Same with the Snow Mountain house. But if you look at Westbrook, back in 2019, they were on the market for 74 days, which is one indication. The market was so much different back then. They were listed for $1,278,000. It wound up selling for $1,257,000. Back then, that was a pretty good price. That was even higher than some of the other sales. Right now, we've got a property that's in escrow on Snow Mountain. So it's crazy. We were listed at $1,549,000. Sold before hitting market. We had multiple offers before it ever went on the market, and we're pending at $1,710,000, which is the highest sale in that neighborhood so far. 160 over, without even having. We just did a bunch of promotion that it was coming, and these buyers gave these people a great offer and allowing them to stay for a long time without cost, and so all these wonderful things. But this is just a difference in these only 2 years, same house. It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. And I know you guys have some to share too.
And TJ, did you have some data on Danville as a whole? I know Lisa mentioned about Blackhawk.
Danville as a whole, it's just easy to kind of understand if you look at the houses that are active versus the houses that are pending, because that tells you a lot about how active the market is. So like the same time frame, you would see pretty much like a level. Let's say the houses on the market, 65 houses on the market back in 2019, you'd see 65, maybe a little bit less than that pending, probably more like 50. So whenever there's less houses pending than there are active, that's how you can kind of gauge the activity. So right now, really this whole year, it's pretty much been consistently in the range of 50 to 60 houses that are active on the market. Today it's 65, and there's 140 that are pending. So it's over double. That's how much it's gone up, and it's pretty much consistently been right in that range, just over double the amount of houses that are pending, which that's a ton of activity.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. There was a time back in 19 or even 18 and 19 where our whole entire East Bay, there was way more active than pending. Like, so this is just,
And that when that happens, everything moves slower, and that's when the prices are not as strong. So when the numbers are opposite and flipped, that's when the prices are much higher, like what we see today.
Yeah. Crazy.
Now I know just, our neighboring city here in San Ramon, it's been the same story. Buyers are coming out of the woodworks, it seems like, all from the North and South Bay to buy here in the East Bay. To compare, in 2019, from January through May, we had 310 property that sold. Now this year, from January through May, we already have 377 sold. So that tells you that the buyers are, here a little more frequently, and there's more demand than there was in 2019. But also right now, in total in San Ramon, we only have 58 properties are active, and we have 165 pending. So that number continues to separate. Like TJ said, Danville has been almost double pending versus active. San Ramon, that's nearly triple. So that tells you that there's a huge constraint on inventory in San Ramon. For example, we listed this property back in March of this year. It was listed in 2019 for 1.175. It sold for 1.25, so 75,000 over asking, and it had 5 offers. We sold it this year. We listed it for 1.4, 1399, and we sold it for 1.625. So Dominic, the homeowner, got almost $400,000 in appreciation in just 2 years. So the market is definitely hot, and it's still increasing, and this could even sell for higher today. And this is back in March.
Well, and to keep in mind, he didn't go in and renovate this house. He just moved in, enjoyed it, and sold it. So
yeah, he kept great care of it. He, did some upgrades here and there, but never like a renovation. It was, he moved in, lived in it for 2 years, and sold it for a lot higher.
Amazing. Yeah.
And
San Ramon's one of our most heated, but
Yeah.
all the areas, yeah.
So the little community of Clayton, which has had the same kind of growth. In right now, there's 15 active listings in Clayton and 12 pending, which doesn't seem that it's not quite as high as some of the other numbers. However, back in 19, the average sales price was $821, and currently the average sales price is $992. So it has changed, gone up tremendously. This particular home, they're the same floor plan in Dana Hills there, and it was listed in 2019 for $899, and it sold. I mean, they got a great offer, 51,000 over asking, sold for $950. The same floor plan recently sold. It was listed for $1,198 and sold for $1,465. 267,000 over asking, which is 515,000 over what it sold for basically in 2019.
Yeah.
So
that is crazy.
Clayton is, even, for the Concord Clayton folks, I mean, the market is very strong. I mean, it's just that trend is all over our county here and all the area. So it's just amazing.
Well, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things, again, we wanted to have this conversation to share with families that are asking us, is this going to be like 2006? So one of the biggest factors in our East Bay, or even Northern California in general, all over, is where our market is driven from is the tech. The tech companies really drive our market, and the tech companies in our pre, post, and and during COVID, is the tech companies are thriving. And so there's been so much innovation with tech, is that we're not likely to see the demand changing anytime in the near future. Tech companies are just thriving, and they're all telling their employees that they can more work from home even after COVID is completely worked its way through, and we're back to what what would be our normal. Is so more and more people are continuing to go a little farther and farther away, which is again why Clayton is a charming little town that's off the beaten path that most people don't even know about. And now, because people they don't have to commute to the city as every day like they would before, places like Clayton become a wonderful possibility to consider.
Well, exactly. And part of some people's reluctance with Clayton is the distance to the freeway. And clearly you're right. I mean, the more people now that can work from home, that becomes less of an issue, or work from home 2 days a week. Now your commute is no longer a 5-day a week. So I'm sure that's, contributed to some of those smaller outlying communities growth.
For sure. Well, it's just haven't you guys noticed too, Ryan and TJ being a younger demographic, more and more of the buyers today are younger and younger. They're working in the tech world, many of them, and maybe many of them are just entrepreneurs. And we had one family that bought a home a couple of years ago, and the young man was during college. He started a shoe company while he was in college. I mean, just the innovation has been just so exciting to see in our country. He starts a shoe company while he's a junior in college, and builds this company where he doesn't even manufacture shoes. He just sells them. So he buys them from manufacturers, sells them on his website that he built. And he was, buying homes in the 2 million plus market in this craziness. And so it's such an interesting time. So, the buyers are coming from places where you wouldn't have seen before because of innovation and, what has allowed, which is again, what makes our country so fantastic is that people can do things like that, and they have, but, buyers are buying that are so much younger than before.
For sure.
Yeah. So the average seller asks us, who's the demographic of our buyer? It's like there's such a much more broad, we have a much more broader buyer pool than maybe what back in the day when, when our high end was only limited to those that had already bought and sold several homes to work their way up to it. Now they're just jumping right into that, So exciting. And I know we've talked a little bit before we have Chris Trapani join us to share some of his perspective. I know we've been talking about buyers. And so, a lot of buyers right now have gone through maybe some bad experiences. You might be watching this and you've tried to write offers on a few houses and you haven't succeeded, where we've been able to help a few buyers get into contracts by using some specific strategies to really help them. And I know Kim had a family get into a house just recently where it was super competitive. So I thought it would be good for us to share maybe some of the tools and tips that we're using to help these families.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think? Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to share my recent experience there real briefly that I have a family, a young couple, again, they're probably in their early 30s, looking very qualified, strong. We wrote several offers, looking kind of Pleasanton, Dublin, San Ramon, Danville, and lost out, which happens. I mean, sometimes 20 offers. The third offer, we got accepted recently, and we wrote the same kind of strong offer. But one of the things that I think got them in this time, as I did the last time, but sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes it's a challenge, and you just have to keep working at it. But what got them in this time different than the last, I think, is that the agent and I super connected. I made phone calls, which I did there as well, but we really connected and had a conversation, and I think that truly helped, as well as the lender calling and our lender calling and having conversations. So sometimes it's just a matter of having or building that relationship and having that connection. And they wrote a great offer, and of course we had some strategies in terms of contingencies, but they got it accepted. And so I think that it's just really important to have someone that really, the more connected you can be with the agents, the better your chances.
For sure. And one last thing too, before our wonderful Chris, he's just jumped on, so we're so excited about that, is one of the tips that we want to give buyers right now too is when you're in a competitive offer situation, if your lender is and no offense to the online loan sources, we honor everyone's business practices, but we have to say, for reputation and allowing another agent to feel confident in your offer, if you have a local lender who's on top of the details, and the other agent sees that that's the case, they feel much more confident that your escrow is actually going to close smoothly. We do not want our sellers to be put through a lending situation where the lender's not communicating. It's an online source that we don't have any connection with. So that's one tip that we would give your buyer if you're looking at a strategy.
Well, and the listing agent did tell me that of the 12 offers, our lender was the only one that connected with her, and that made a difference. Yeah. So there you have it right there.
Our wonderful Daryl. Yep. So, hey, Chris, thank you for joining us. I know, Chris, you are muted. There you go.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, so this is Chris Trapani. So we mentioned you all, we were so excited that you were going to join us. So Chris is the CEO and founder of our company, Sereno. And so, Chris, we've been sharing some specific data, as you know, about the market in general, the East Bay, kind of some national statistics about, where our market's headed, and a lot of reasons why people ask us, is this going to be like 2006? Are we going to see a crash? And we gave them some real good data to support the fact that things are different than back then. There's likely to be a stronger moving forward in our market, even though we've had a big increase. We're not likely to see that type of adjustment that we saw before. But if you would give your perspective on, what are you seeing in the market? Because you get to see a broader area. We're more East Bay. You are kind of all over. What are you seeing?
Sure. Well, again, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And thank you for your patience. I was grateful to be out at a high school sporting event.
Yay.
To watch our son wrestle for Bellarmine over at St. Francis High School. And just so nice to be back outside and seeing the activities and,
So did he win his match?
He did, actually. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad he did because I figured you would ask. So no pressure.
Not that we,
Congratulations.
You
Oh
did.
my
They're all
gosh.
tough. Every wrestling match is tough. And my, credit to every child and athlete that gets on the mat. It's kind of like
used to be a
realtors,
wrestler.
hats off to all the realtors that have the courage to, be in this business, this highly emotional business, which requires a lot. It really, really requires a lot. It's difficult to explain sometimes what realtors actually do, but it's pretty much everything. So, in any case, and I love what you were talking about right before, just when I was listening, because the word that came to mind to me was accountability. And that's really an important feature and factor. And the problem with the so-called, not all, but many of these so-called, let's just say, with the promise of being innovative or tech or whatnot, the problem is if there's no one who's actually accountable, that actually knows what they're talking about, then it creates a lot of unnecessary frustration in what's already a highly emotional experience. And so it's just interesting to me that it's the flip side oftentimes, that the automation doesn't provide the accountability that the level of having a lender or a real estate agent or people in the same town and community that know who those people are, they know how they work, they know whose word they can trust and rely on. And if there's an issue, which issues do arise, they know that people are going to show up and work together to work through it. So these are really, really important things that I think, some of these, so-called, modern day solutions neglect to focus on. So, but that I'll get off that.
Well, and they say, real estate in general, like moving in general. And I always tell every client this right up in the beginning, because they're likely to experience a lot of stress and emotion. It's like, it ranks right up there with the top 3 biggest stresses in your whole life is death, divorce, and moving. It's like, it's not easy. So when you're in the middle of even a smooth transaction, it's going to give people that high level of, like you said, that emotion. And if all you're doing is you're on a phone with a click of a button and accomplishing the pieces, and there's no one there to handle, it can be disastrous. It can be
right. Yeah. And I'm not a lawyer, but I remember a lawyer once saying that there was a buyer that wanted to sue for emotional distress. And the lawyer said, guess what? There are no damages for emotional distress in real estate because every transaction is emotionally stressful. And so to your point, that's kind of the reality, but I got a chuckle out of that. Now, so on to, and I think about this a lot because I consider myself a student of not only the business, but of the market trends. Mm-hmm. And for the better part of the last 2+ decades, so probably going back, well, at least to the mid 90s, I've really strived to kind of gain a pulse or an insight using certain metrics, but not relying only on those metrics. Some of it is one of the benefits, actually, getting back to again of working with someone like yourself and your team, is you have knowledge that's happening in this hour, in this day, in this week that you can't Google. All right. And in this fast-paced moving dynamic, that is really, really important. And so, part of my outlook is based on listening to the anecdotes that I hear from agents on a daily basis. I'll call it like hyper-local information. Mm-hmm. And it takes the online platforms and the news, if not weeks, months to catch up to what already happened in the rear view. And that's old news 3 or 4 weeks ago. So, so I've really tried to apply kind of the day-to-day knowledge, and even you can find individual situations which will give you a little bit of a read or a data point to say, okay, is this a little bit of a trend or is this just a one-off? And so those are the things that I've really kind of tried to apply to my outlook, my forecast. So with regards to where we are now, it was somewhat predictable. I mean, the general trajectory of this market was at least somewhat predictable in the second half of last year. And maybe not to the extent that we're seeing.
Yeah.
But if you took a look at, one of the things I follow the most closely is the month's supply of inventory, because real estate is a supply and demand driven market. Lower supply, higher demand, prices rise. Higher supply, lower demand, prices decline. And
Yep.
so when you look at, the counties that we serve and the Bay Area in general, historically, 5 months supply, like right here, 5 months supply is kind of an equilibrium. That's like a balanced market in my view. That's when you have a balanced proportion of listings and buyers and sellers are, reasonably negotiating. And that's kind of how it goes. When you start talking about like 2 months supply and 1 month supply or less,
or 2 weeks supply,
right, on a county-wide or even on an even more micro in a town or city, I mean, that is incredibly low. And so what happened was in the third and fourth quarter of 2020 was in many of the areas we serve, in Contra Costa County and Alameda County and Santa Clara County and San Mateo County, and pretty much every county we serve in the Bay Area, the month supply was at 1 month or less. Now, when you talk about 1 month, you're talking 18 days supply, for example. And I think Contra Costa or Alameda, one of those had like 18 days supply at some point, even in the early part of this year. What does that mean? For our listeners, some might wonder, what does that mean? Maybe you already explained it.
No, that would be good for you to share. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah, what that means that if not one new listing came on the market, in 18 days, there'd be no more listings to sell, because the rate of sales is 18 days. I mean, 18 days supply is what's left based on the rate of sales. So 1 month supply means there's 1 month left. If not, when the one new listing came on in 30 days, there wouldn't be any left. So to be in this 1 month supply condition, all right, let's just start there. That is incredibly low. Then you have, I think, the phenomena, there's a really, really powerful phenomena that began as almost as soon as the shelter in place orders were put in place. And we started wondering about this. How are people going to begin evaluating their home, the layout of their home, the rooms, the space, the lack thereof? Do they have a yard? Do they not? Do they like where they live? Are they living there because out of duty they live there? They felt they had to live there, right? And so I know that really what was triggered was this phenomena of a complete reevaluation of at least those conditions. Yeah. And it really launched this market out of the gate. Even after the first 30 days when our business wasn't essential, this was last March, April, and then we were deemed essential. I mean, it was almost like it was pretty immediate that you saw, this great movement all around the Bay Area, people from the city coming down the peninsula, people from the Bay Area or from South Bay going to East Bay, people from all areas going to Santa Cruz or Tahoe, right? So, I mean, and this is still going on right now. And so that phenomena, I think, is a big, big part of what's actually driving a lot of the demand right now. Okay. And so can I go on? Because I have more to share.
Yes, yes. And we love your perspective, because we are, we love our South Bay friends and our friends in the city and all the realtors that families move here, but we're not as like in tune with all of the whole broader thing is what you are, which is what we love that you're sharing. So thank you.
Right. And so, and the Bay Area, again, let's just talk about the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and we're also in some other markets like Lake Tahoe, I mentioned, and Sierra Foothills, and we do some business in San Diego and whatnot. But for the most part, the Bay Area in general has also largely been driven by tech, by technology, by the tech businesses. And, we've gone back to 2000 and shown graphs where, real estate values have trended almost along the line of the NASDAQ, for example, particularly in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so before COVID, the NASDAQ was already, I believe it was around an all-time high even before this started, which was in the mid 8,000s. And I'm making a very much an estimate. And then when the panic started, it dipped down under 7,000 for a brief moment. Well, now it's almost 14,000. And so whether it's 14,000 or 8,000 or 7,000, there's a great deal of asset value, a great deal of capital and asset value locked up in those stocks. And so what I also think happened was the driver for the release of that liquidity was what I was just saying a few minutes ago. The phenomena, if I'm living in my home and it's not suiting my needs and I'm sitting on a massive stock portfolio, well, guess what? Last I checked, you can't live in your stock portfolio. It's not really bettering your life. I mean, maybe you sleep a little better at night, but meanwhile, you know, you've got other challenges. So I think that a lot of that was unleashed.
Yeah.
And that's really been spread out throughout the Bay Area now. So instead of being just concentrated, say in the city or Palo Alto or Menlo Park or Mountain View at the tech epicenter, a lot of that now has been really, really spread out. It's like a release of, frankly, trillions of dollars of capital out of the stocks out to all these other marketplaces, right? Now, I just mentioned too, the NASDAQ right now is right around an all-time high. So that means there's even more of that to go around. And so, you know, why that is, you know, behind this, we do have a lot of liquidity as a result of the stimulus, you know, and I think that came out so rapidly in such large amounts that no one really knows how much of that maybe went to the people that were in the greatest need or not. But nevertheless, you're talking trillions of more dollars that were pumped into the money supply, which have also been gone back into the stock market. They've gone into real estate, you know, and lots of other things. So you have a lot of different dynamics. Okay, let's talk about the last main one is interest rates. So, you know, my wife and I bought our first house in 91 or 92. And I think we were so happy because our rate was under 10%. I think it was like 9.75 or something. And so, wow, you know, looking at where rates are today, it's very attractive for people.
Well, you know, it's crazy, Chris. Yeah. My first house I bought in the 80s, and we did an FHA assumable loan. And back then that we were coming down off, when I first started in real estate, we were coming down off like that 16, 18%, right? So we thought the same thing. I did an FHA assumable loan at 9.5%, same thing. And we're like, whoa, under, you know, single digits, woo, you know, back then. So yes, we can all celebrate the fact that we are such historic lows.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, we are experiencing incredible appreciation. I mean, in a short period of time. I think it's explainable by some of the things that I just mentioned. And I think the question is, look, real estate valuations in terms of their rise have never been a straight line. But as far as I've experienced, and people that have been around the business way longer than me have always said, as long as you own it long enough, you've been guaranteed to make money. Yeah. And for the last 100 years, that's pretty much been how it's been. And so I've kind of carried some of that old wisdom in my mind as I've navigated through 3 adjustments or 3.5 adjustments or whatever you want to call them, and just kind of stayed in the game along the way. And the long-term benefits have been profound. So, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris. What do you see? Because we've been kind of like, you know, discussing this is, you know, buyers and sellers are asking us, what are we likely to see over the next couple of years based on all the reasons why you said, you know, what is driving the Bay Area? What do you think? What do you see in our market here the next couple of years?
Well, I think you might have touched on something a few minutes ago, which is pretty important because, you know, those of us that have been around long enough, some have a little PTSD from 2008.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the aspects that is completely in contrast with the setup from that, right? That was an unsustainable credit issue. Yep. That was at massive scale, right? Yep. And you basically had just massive credit extended to people who never should have been extended credit, right? Now, if you look at the last 12 years or so, and you look at the average FICO scores, the credit scores that people have had to have in order to get a loan, try getting a loan these days. And that's been that way. So you have a foundation of almost overqualifying of 10 years of that, where all the thousands of homes that have changed hands during that time have a really about as firm of a foundation as they've maybe had as long as I've been in the business, right? So I do think that that provides a level of protection in terms of any sort of outlier situations or, economic adjustments. Now, look, for sellers right now, they see where the values are, the new prices are being established. It's about as good as they've probably ever seen since they've owned their property. So, I mean, it depends on what a seller's timeline is. If they say, hey, I have a 1 to 3 year timeline, what the market is now. Might be an inconvenience, but it's probably a good time to kind of consider maybe selling. If you say, look, I have a 5-year plan or 10-year plan, or I'm doing this to move up or something, that's different.
Yeah.
Then I think you can kind of say, okay, I'm going to kind of, ride through to see, it might rise. There might be a little bit of settling or some adjusting. And then over time, it's going to be a good investment, right? A lot of people are probably evaluating those things. So I think we have, and I said this at the end of last year, I still think there's a lot of momentum here. I think this is a 1 to 3 year run like we've actually never seen before. I think we're in the midst of that. I don't necessarily believe the level or rate of appreciation we've just seen over the last 3 to 6 months is going to continue at that rate.
We agree. We think we're going to stabilize here this year.
That's right.
It should be good. A stabilization would be a
totally. So I think you're going to see, because what happens is then sellers start to think, well, wait, that last comp just sold for this, which might have been way over the asking price, but it got there because it was listed under and a lot of people bid it up.
Yeah.
And so when that starts to happen, that starts to slow things down just a little bit, because those homes will sit longer, and then there's price reductions, and then you start finding the market's smart. The market doesn't even need the internet. It's almost like people have telepathy. They kind of figure these things out and the market, finds its way. So
as long as it's exposed aggressively, yes, it's like the market will find you for sure.
Exactly. And that's a whole nother thing, it's like the whole, self-serving pitch of, having a listing be private because it's somehow better for a seller. Well, in very, very few exceptions is that the case.
Yeah.
The way to get the most value out of your home is to expose it to the most number of people. I mean, we learned that in 1960 in real estate. Some of these philosophies are just so backwards and old school. It's incredible. So that's our job at Sereno, because we aim higher. And, we want our sellers to understand that we're putting their best interest first. We want what's best for them. So, for buyers, I think, again, if you take a longer term view at this, you look at where rates are at, you lock in a 30-year fixed rate at wherever that rate might be, it's awfully low, 3% plus or minus, that's something that I think is attractive. And so it probably is going to take, a couple different tries or more, right? Because there's a lot of competition and most buyers are not securing the first one they offer on. But I would encourage buyers to stay engaged, because just at that point where the buyer goes, hey, I'm so tired of it, I'm done, is where there's a little lull in the market.
Yeah. There's a little bit more availability.
There's just a little bit of lull. Like all of a sudden, the buyer says, oh, I'm done, and it's May 30th. And all of a sudden, June 15th or July 4th comes around and you're like, wait a minute, here's a perfect house for you. It just came on and there's only one offer instead of 10 or something like that. Happens all the time. So it's really,
I'm sorry. Don't you think too, there's a few things that are going to potentially open the door for more inventory. Like there are some people that have been waiting for COVID to be a little more behind us for them to feel comfortable. So we're starting to see the opening up more of California. So we're likely to see a little bit more inventory because of that, seasonally and Prop 19 and all the things that we have in our market that will allow for a little more inventory.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And also back to the supply and demand. I mean, the classic definition is as prices rise, people that have the supply are motivated to put their supply out there. Yeah. And so now what's happening is the sellers are catching up on, wow, wait a minute, the value's there. So that's actually, and it takes a couple, 2-3 months for that flywheel to get mobilized. But you are right. There's going to be multiple forces that, now I'm saying relatively speaking, let's talk about inventory. I don't see any way that we can have any level of excess inventory in 2021. Yeah. It's just not mathematically possible based upon where we're at right now. In fact, I would say right now it's a little bit far out there, it would be difficult even in 22, you know, putting aside any kind of big outlier that no one has thought about, that we can see over excess inventory. It would probably take a couple years of slowing economic conditions and all those kind of things to get that inventory built back up to a level where it's, you know, like a balanced level. So I also think some of the property tax or the capital gains tax questions and the 1031 questions, I think that there's going to be, well, you're going to get it on multiple fronts. You may get sellers wanting to sell to lock in capital gains at the rate this year. You may get sellers wanting to sell because they want to make sure they can do a 1031.
Yep.
You may even get some stock sales before year end to lock in capital gains. And the most likely place that where those funds end up getting invested is in real estate, because it's a great hedge. It's a tangible asset. It's a great hedge against, you know, what could be ahead.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, gosh, we so appreciate your insight and your input, you know, and we have to tell you, I know I don't speak, I know we all feel the same way, that we're so excited to be a part of what you and you know, Sereno, what you guys have been building, and to be a part of your company has been awesome.
Well, thank you for that.
Yes.
You were already out there doing that, right? I mean, to me, the Sereno thing is just a higher level of practice, right? It's just practicing at the highest level possible for the benefit of our clients. And so your team, the Doyle team, was already doing that. The great thing is, by us coming together, just makes that stronger.
Yeah.
And really it ensures the longer term, you know, best service to the people that we have the privilege to help.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. We're very grateful for that. So thank you so much. So, you know, your input on your insight, and, you know, I would say that, you know, overall people can be a little bit comfortable with the fact that the current market is likely to be sustainable. We're likely to stabilize sometime, you know, we'll see, maybe a year, maybe or so, where we may not see quite as much growth, but it looks as though the demand is coming from the tech world is going to be building for years to come, you know?
Right. Yeah. But I can close with the last thing. I don't know if we're done in over time, but
Yeah.
you know, for all the talk of people leaving, well, for every one person that's selling, we're seeing that there's 10, 15, 20 people that want to stay and they want that
At
home.
least.
So that's what's happening. So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, you guys. Thanks, you guys, for watching.
Happy Mother's Day too to everybody.
Happy Mother's Day. Thank you. And if anyone has questions, you guys let us know. We're always happy to help. Take care. Stay well.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Bye, guys.
See you guys. Thank you.
Bye.